You're watching ClearCut. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Makori. As we've been reporting, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a symbolic measure today, backing a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, to be clear, when Congress passes resolutions like this, it's meant to convey and clarify U.S. policy. But the question is, who needs to hear and clarify this message? The measure's wording made it sound like it was the U.S. or Israel that need to clarify or change policies to support the two-state solution. It includes the assertion that, quote, only the outcome of a two-state solution can both ensure the state of Israel's survival as a Jewish and democratic state and fulfill the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people for a state of their own. But putting the focus on what the U.S. or Israel are willing to promise or concede is where so many peace efforts fail when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Perhaps the focus should be put elsewhere. Now, to be clear, the U.S., the European powers, and Israel have always supported the idea of one state for the Jews and one for the Arabs in what is now Israel. Jewish residents in what was then the British-controlled mandate called Palestine began supporting British plans to split the land between them and Arabs starting in 1936. But the first of the most formal offers of separate states for Jews and Arabs came in 1947. That was when the UN voted to approve a partition plan splitting what is now Israel into two parts. The Jewish residents accepted it and declared the State of Israel in 1948. The Arabs rejected it and immediately joined with 5 neighboring Arab nations to invade the new Israeli state. Now, the second most formal offer of a two-state solution came in 2000. Then U.S. President Bill Clinton hosted intense peace talks at Camp David between then Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Now, the talks ended with a comprehensive peace plan and a statehood offer to the Palestinians known as the Clinton Parameters. Prime Minister Barak accepted President Clinton's proposal. Arafat refused. He then returned home and launched a new terror campaign against Israeli civilians known as the Second Intifada. Now, finally, in 2008, then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Olmert presented a comprehensive peace plan. It included annexing the major Israeli settlements to Israel and gave equivalent Israeli territory to the Palestinians. It also would have divided Jerusalem. The Palestinians promised to get back to Olmert after he made the offer, but they never did. And this also comes at a time when it's not even clear whom Israel and the U.S. would negotiate with anyway. Palestinian territorial control is split now between the terrorist group Hamas, which controls Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority, or Fatah, which controls the West Bank. And Hamas, by the way, still doesn't even recognize Israel's right to exist. Even the revised charter states that Hamas does not recognize the Jewish state and refers to it as the, quote, Zionist enemy. So it seems that Hamas needs convincing about the two-state solution. Now, again, to be clear, none of this means that a two-state solution is not the path to peace for Israel and the Palestinians. But it is curious why politicians in the countries that have always supported that idea, namely the U.S. and Israel, seem to think that it's important to continue to announce that they support the idea. That's as opposed to trying to finally getting the Palestinians to accept it. All right, joining us now to talk about today's vote is Matt Brodsky. Matt is a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Matt, good to have you with us. Matt, was this resolution even necessary?
No, of course not. It's just the Democrats' latest attempt to register a very public displeasure with the president, with the State Department, who, of course, very recently decided that it wasn't going to be involved in Israeli permits, land permits and building and zoning, when it declared that it's not going to view settlements illegal. So this is what they do. And of course, this type of resolution was to be, it's not only toothless to begin with, but it just is, it's milquetoast. It doesn't actually say anything beyond the same history that you had already laid out very well. So for members of the squad, basically, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, to go against this it's because, frankly, Israel's existence is just too much for them to bear. And this is, again, their way of masquerading it as it not being sufficiently pro-Palestinian. It points to the giant divide that's in the Democratic Party. And what this resolution did, more than affect anything in the peace process, is point out once again to all Democrats that in their party there is rising anti-Israeli sentiment and anti-Semitism on the furthest part of the left. And that voice is given a lot of room to breathe and a lot of room to talk. And it will, in time, frankly, be the majority of the Democratic opinion among those who are serving.
All right, well, Matt, on the political front, some are positioning this or framing this as a rebuke to President Trump and the Trump administration. Do you see it that way necessarily?
Well, frankly, anything that originates in the House, which is trying to impeach the president or successfully impeaching the president, well, yeah, that's pretty much done as a rebuke to the president to begin with.
I mean, from a policy perspective, though, has there been any indication? I mean, I know that the president has said that it's up to the parties to decide. There was that famous line that he said, one state, two state, really, it's up to them. I mean, has there been any kind of definitive position that the U.S. is no longer pro a two-state solution?
Well, Jared Kushner has said that he's not using two-state solution. It means something different to each of the sides. Obviously, as you pointed out, Hamas is running Gaza. So are we then talking about a three-state solution? But out of fear that it might not be a two-state solution or some other Palestinian statehood entity, that's why people are still clinging to the idea that it must be a two-state solution because it's the only type of plan that would in fact work. Now, again, that is what has been said for 30 years or so and has never yet worked. And of course, as you pointed out, there was a partition plan for Palestinian or Arab statehood in 1947, and they rejected it. So perhaps it's time to try something different. We don't know what the actual peace parameters that the administration is going to put out. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. But this is the Democrats' way of trying to say, well, at least it must be two states. And for some on the further left,
all right,
far.
Matt, we don't know what the U.S. parameters are. And as we've pointed out, the two-state solution has been rejected by the Palestinians countless times in the past. Have they said what parameters they would accept? I mean, do we have a clear picture from the Palestinians, again, keeping in mind that we're talking about a group that's split up into two groups that are fighting amongst each other? But have the Palestinians actually said what the parameters that are acceptable to them would be? Well,
they still want Jerusalem, and they will sometimes specify East Jerusalem as a capital or sometimes just say Jerusalem in general, which is incredibly unlikely to happen. The return of all refugees in the end, which is, in other words, the whole creation of a two-state solution, means that there'd be a Palestinian state and then a state of Israel in which Palestinian refugees, millions of them, would return and then, of course, turn that into a Palestinian state. So they still want the return of millions of refugees. And the borders, I mean, this is something that they, frankly, don't want to be a disarmed state. So And
again, Matt, there's obviously tremendous differences between what Hamas says from the river to the sea, that's what they want, and what we've heard from the Palestinian Authority in terms of acceptable parameters. All right, Matt, thank you so much. Always good to have you with us. Matt Brodsky from the Gold Institute.
Pleasure.
All right, meanwhile, the domestic